Keith Banks is a former Queensland police officer who holds two Valor Awards. He's also a published author. The first book he published was Drugs, Guns and Lies, about his life as an undercover police officer, and Gun to the Head, which has just been released recently. And I've got to say, I've been checking that out. The reviews are great, and I'm really looking forward to, I've ordered my copy, and I'm really looking forward to reading that myself. That's about his life as a tactical officer. He's lived a pretty full life, and he's here to chat with us today. So, Keith, mate.
Hello, mate.
Thanks for coming on board.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation. And as I said before we started, given that I'll have to overcome my natural shyness in speaking, I probably need to just have a 150 lashes.
Well, mate, a man is not a camel, and I hope you're getting money for that product placement.
Damn it! I've spoken to you before.
Yeah, get straight on the phone. You guys owe me.
No, it's good to be here, mate. Thank you.
But look, mate, tell our listeners about you.
Yes, gee, well, okay. I was in the police force, which then became the police service from 1975 to 95. I joined as a boy cadet, so the year I turned 17, back in the old system where you could do years 11 and 12 and another 12 months if you wanted. I went in and did year 12 at the academy, then another 12 months. In hindsight, mate, way too young for a cop, male, female, to be on the road at 19 with very little life experience. It was just, it was a trip. So I did the usual stuff. I had to wait till I was 19 after I left the academy, 5 months of bloody going and working as a graduate cadet and driving particular inspector around and putting up with all sorts of interesting discipline. Sworn in, worked at a suburban station, walked the beat, did the drunks van, all that stuff. Finally got myself transferred to Brisbane Mobile Patrols, which was the best uniform station I ever worked in. For those of the listeners who are probably a bit younger than we are, who are current or former members, Mobiles was working with a permanent partner, permanent division, permanent shifts, and your only role was to be on the road and respond to high-risk jobs or pull over people who looked a bit sus and take down every line of inquiry you wanted. So, great place to work. And it was so good, mate, that I don't think I ever took leave or was worried about missing out on something. So that speaks volumes. Then I volunteered for undercover work in the drug squad. And it's important to point out, I guess, that if you think back, anyone watching this, think back to when you were a young kid full of ideals and you wanted to change the world. That's what I was. I come from the country. I trained in martial arts 5 days a week. I didn't drink. For those who know me, I know it's a surprise. I didn't drink. I didn't smoke. I'd certainly never used drugs. Volunteered for undercover because I wanted to genuinely do something that would change the world, fight the drug trade, night on a white charger. Nothing wrong with having ideals, but within 3 months, I reckon, I'd transformed from that clean living, young, idealistic bloke to a binge drinking, undercover guy who was smoking just as much weed as the dealers he was working on, and breaking every rule I could in the book, basically.
So we know when you joined the job and why. So it was the kind of idealism thing. And mate, I joined at 19 too, so I know.
Yep, just little kid.
1991. There I was, 19 years old.
Mm.
But so what was the appeal with covert specifically? Why having a lot of fun in mobiles, which is now TCS basically, despite Fitzgerald kind of said you can't have any more mobiles, you can't do that anymore.
I think that was that clown Newnham actually who closed mobiles down because he didn't like the fact that they weren't reporting to an assistant commissioner or some bizarre crap like that. But mate, the covert thing was adventure, and it was something that once I realised undercover existed, I thought I want to be one of them. Because the whole concept of, working with a different name, a different identity with no rules, grow your hair, put an earring in, all of that, move away from that 2 years of complete paramilitary discipline at the academy. And then still in mobiles, as great as it was, you're still told when to take your meal. You know, you're in uniform, there's certain rules and restrictions you've got to follow. As a UC, particularly in those days, there were no rules. You know, and that sounds bizarre, but we were pretty much thrown out into the world. Sometimes you had an informant to work with, sometimes you didn't. And you just went to pubs and you hung around, you met people, and you basically, you know, went out and looked for drug dealers. In an operation, we'd be sent, and we predominantly worked one out. Sometimes I worked with a partner, but not very often. So we'd be sent to, let's say, Cairns, right? Okay, Banksy, there's a detective up there who knows you're coming. He's going to be your contact. Away you go. When you've got something, give us a call. So, you know, you go to Cairns, you find your own place to live. You had, seriously, in those days, I think I had something like 4 bank accounts, because all you needed to open a bank account in the 80s was a driver's license. And we had a sheaf of driver's license, blank driver's licenses of the drug squad. Yeah. And they were paper licenses, no photos.
Yep.
So here we go. So you're going with the drug, you're scrunching around a bit on the floor. One of my mates taught me to throw it in a microwave, and I think Steve Grant, if you're listening, it may have been you. Throw stuff in a microwave, which ages it, and you go into a bank and open up an account. Suddenly, you might have 10 grand in there of money that, you know, just was there for buys, or alternatively, you'd have 10K in cash on your person, which again was a lot of money then, a lot of money now. Okay. And that was all photocopied bills, etc. So it just depended on the operation. And the buzz for me was the fear and the exhilaration. So if you've ever been really scared and you get that adrenaline dump, that's an addictive thing. That's awesome. And also just being able to not have any connection with the police force in your everyday life is that was a pretty big buzz as well. The only people that we really connected with and hung around with were other undercover agents, because we were, and I've written about this in the first book as well, ostracized is a strong word, but, you know, a lot of cops were a bit nervous of us because they didn't know what the hell we were all about. You know, we were the ones with I walked into the drug squad the first day when I was undercover and saw a mate, Ando, who I hadn't seen for a couple of years, and he had hair down past his shoulders. He had his feet on the desk of one of the drug squad typists, and his face buried in a ½ ounce of hash. And the first thing he said was, "Fuck, this is good gear." And I walked in and thought, I think I know him, I'm not sure. And that was an indication of just the whole different culture, you know. So smoking weed, never formally condoned, but absolutely informally condoned, if you get my drift. So, yeah, cool. You know, there was one of the guys, I won't name him, but he said, and he started after I did, he said the first 2 weeks, he'd been given a bag of pot when he first walked in. One of the detectives said, "Here, you'll need this." And he said he had it on his bedside table for 2 weeks. And every morning he'd wake up and go, "I wonder whether this is an integrity test. What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to report it? I don't know." After 2 weeks, he realized it was there to smoke, you know, and just to go and roll joints with targets and whatever. And he rapidly became one of the biggest potheads I ever met. So, you know, so the welfare around UCs was zero. Yeah, we were, you know, and again, as much as it was a ton of fun and we had a ton of fun, there were pretty bloody frightening moments as well. You know, there's no surveillance, no backup, not like the movies. You were just out in the world. And as much as it was a ton of fun, the welfare was non-existent. We were used as a means to an end by detectives who needed to get an arrest quota up. And regardless of whether the police force, and I keep saying force because it didn't change the service till after Fitzgerald, regardless of whether the police force denied it or not, and they did deny it a few times, there were kill sheets and there were arrest quotas. If you didn't make a particular amount of a criminal arrest per month, you were back in uniform before you could blink. So it became a numbers game. So sometimes we could target drug dealers. A lot of the times we were just out there to get as many drug buys as we could so that, you know, there could be a number of arrests, which meant that the detectives' kill sheets looked good for a couple of months. That's a simple.
Yeah, and that's right. Like, you know, I did a small time and I had a plainclothes appointment for a little while, and no red ink in the diary means big chat from the boss. It's like,
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
no red ink.
Dust off your boots and your bloody fancy looking shirt and your hat, because you're back in, you know, you're back on divisional duties or something.
How about you get your ass out there and go and pinch some crooks? Like,
go and pinch somebody, yeah. Which is why, you know, there were so many. I couldn't believe it. Back in the drug squad, there were so many arrests for a bong and a bag of dope, and you'd think the bloody drug squad should be targeting massive amounts of heroin dealing that was going on, and it was. So back in the 70s, the Mr. Asia syndicate, Terence John Clark, I think it was, who was in the head of the Mr. Asia syndicate, he was a Kiwi. He was responsible single-handedly for creating an organisation that flooded Australia with heroin. So, you know, junkies were dropping off the perch at a great rate of knots. You know, the ODs were everywhere because of the purity of heroin. So, you know, that was the real reason I wanted to do all this stuff. I regarded heroin as a scourge, and I still do. Although now ice is the filthy drug that's just ruining lives. You know,
I've got to butt in there for a second.
I do get my soapbox about this.
Yeah, no. Yes, you are right. And I remember, again, in the early and mid-90s, and we used to sit around in the meal rooms and whine about heroin, going, man, terrible drug, blah, blah, blah. Because, you know, the overdoses, you find some poor bastard in a... Yeah. I never found anyone in an alley, but like, you know, one of the jobs I went to, some guy in a public toilet, and, you know, you go to these young girls too, you know, you go to these young girls and...
Yeah, very common.
These houses with, you know, dead as doornails, you know, and just and some of them would have been, you know, if they hadn't smashed their lives up, would have been really attractive girls. I kind of get that.
Yeah.
But now we kind of sit round, but really when it comes right down to it, like heroin is a law enforcement officer's drug. Like, you know, it's the kind of stuff you want to police because it's a depressant, right? Yep. You take too much of it. Okay, you die. That's bad. We're out there to protect people, stop that from happening. But you don't take heroin and go out and commit crime. You go out and commit crime when you've run out of heroin and you've got to go and steal stuff.
Yeah, sure.
It's a depressant. It's like, man, that is the drug, you know, if I was going to pick a drug that's going rampant, that's the one I want. Because methamphetamine, you take that, you don't sleep for 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
And if you've taken some steroids with it, which a lot of people do, so you're strong, you're psychotic, you haven't slept for 3 or 4 days, you're going to like, and you can't even reason. I mean, it's hard to reason with people that are on serious depressants.
Yeah.
But it is impossible to reason with someone who's like got a serious methamphetamine.
It burns the frontal lobe of the brain, mate. The power of reason is gone.
Well, and we'd sit there and go, oh, bring back the days where heroin was the drug sweet.
Because you're right. You know,
I want heroin back.
There was a lot of crime in the 80s because of heroin addictions. And in fact, I've written about a mate of ours who was a UC who developed a heroin habit directly as a result of his job. And he was kicked to the curb by the service then, I think. Put all his payout up his arm and started doing armed robberies because that was the only way he could actually feed his addiction. Direct result of his occupation, you know. And it pisses me off that I'm very sure I know who was responsible, and that person will never be held accountable for ruining a young bloke's life. But anyway, that was a detective who kept him supplied. But so there was crime that way, you know, and there were some junkies who'd saw off at 22, and you know there'd be a shot fired because they didn't know what the hell they were doing with a weapon. But you're right, mate. So I look at it now. Even a taser won't take them down. You know, so I feel sorry for operational coppers now trying to deal with that. Particularly, every move they make is filmed. Holy Jesus, you know, like, and I think I'm actually I'm a bit like you, mate. I'm shamelessly plugging my books, but I've actually written. Someone pointed out in the second book where I've written about, you know, if you've never tried to take down an angry man, you'll never understand why it takes 4 or 5 coppers to do it. Right. Yeah. And we all know that's the case. Someone doesn't want to go to the ground. You can't suddenly pull out a Keanu Reeves John Wick move and toss him over your shoulder. You've got to use brute force.
I genuinely think there are 2 dynamics that are really impacting on, well, no, three dynamics. Now, I know that makes me sound like Monty Python. Three, but like three things that are really impacting on that. And because the police are actually pretty good at their job generally in the Western world, and they keep the peace, that means that people don't get confronted with violence.
Yeah.
They don't know. So to them, a violent, angry man really is an abstraction. The only time they see it is on TV, and then they do see these Wing Chun, you hit them once and they fall over, and they think, well, why can't you do that?
That's right.
And then you get, so that's kind of circular. And then you get to, because if you kind of think of the judiciary, and I respect them, like I'm not one of those, they're all dickheads. No, like, I know magistrates, I know a couple of judges actually. I know a high court judge, or I've had beers with. They're not fools, but the second world, and I really want to articulate this because actually there's a real good chance that one of them may listen to this. After the Second World War and in Vietnam, you had people who were service people, so they'd seen real violence, and then they went and got their law degrees. They'd had life experience, I suppose, would be the best way of articulating. But they knew the realities of the human condition.
Yeah.
They knew what it was like to be scared. They knew what it was like to have your life threatened. They knew that people don't just fall over when you hit them. In fact, they knew that just shooting someone will not always stop someone. You know what I mean? They got these things. Why? Because they'd served on they'd been in World War II, they'd been in Korea, they'd been in Vietnam, they'd been in these places. Then they went and got their law degrees, they worked up, they understood that the police had a job and that society really, no kidding, really will collapse. Like, have a look at the places where they're defunding the police in America. It's like
Chicago. Bang.
Yeah. But Portland, Oregon. And it's like, I don't mean this in a bad way, but it's like, keep me in the loop, idiots. Like you are getting, you asked for it. To quote Bobby Kennedy, John's brother. Yeah. You get the police service you want, the amount of crime you deserve. It's nothing is sinister is what's going on. It's just that people don't know what they don't know. Yeah. And if you live in a protected world, and that protection is created by other people, and you're kind of like looking and going, well, everything's okay here. I don't kind of need this. I don't need this protective bubble. Well, if you've ever been in a place where law and order is disintegrated, and that happens in the first world now, because people always really believe, no, it's just our character. That's not how human beings are, or even if it's how human beings are. If you live in a cultured, sophisticated place, people just become civilized, and you don't need violent men and women out there doing violence on the behalf of me. I don't want that. And that kind of needs that kind of needs to stop. You know what I mean?
Yeah, mate. I used to be amused when I was in uniform. You'd have people saying to me, "Is that gun loaded?" Well, it's not much use if it's not. Oh my God. Okay.
It's not there to look at. All right, and Janelle has asked a really, really good question. She has asked, and she's a copper's kid, so she gets this, and a journalist, and a phenomenally smart lady, if I actually make the observation. I wanted to get her on as a guest, but she said no. Just saying.
Let's see what we can do.
She says undercover police are beyond skilled in human intelligence, but with the advancement of science, DNA, and so many other forensics intelligence, do people underestimate the importance and dangers that undercover police and their roles in solving some of the most serious crimes? So if you could comment on that, Keith.
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, I don't know how coverts work now, and I don't need to know, but I do know that they exist. I'm aware of a couple of things, and I'll be careful in what I say. But a great example of the use of undercover police was the Daniel Morcombe investigation, which was based on the big boss model from the Canadian Police Service, I think Calgary actually.
Yeah.
And that is a beautiful example of undercover police befriending, tricking, manipulating, obtaining the truth through not normal police measures, but still completely legal ones, and having a great outcome and a great result. There are still undercovers working all across the country in organised crime. I had the great fortune to travel to New York City pre-COVID 3 years ago now. And I'm a martial artist, so I went out to Staten Island and trained with a retired NYPD undercover guy, who's an 8th Dan, fantastic guy. And he was controlling undercover operations, particularly anti-terrorism, before he retired. And he told me some things about how they operate. And I've got to tell you, there is a role for undercover police, because even though we have DNA and we have advances in science, that's not about getting people to tell you things. And that's what undercover police are very good at. And in fact, we almost develop a master's in lying, yeah, where telling the truth can become challenging. So, you know, when you're living in that world, that's more the important thing, I think, that undercovers and their controllers and their supervisors need to understand, is that, you know, it's about looking after the welfare of UCs, because they spend their lives mixing with people who are on the other side. And the undercover, one of the big challenges for undercover police is to retain their identity. Yeah, went slightly off track with that, but but I do see that there's a real need for undercover operatives, because outlaw motorcycle gangs, organised crime gangs have particular methods of operation that need an undercover cop to be involved, or need an undercover cop to actually go and become part of that organisation to cripple them.
Absolutely, and that's raised a number of questions. But I'm going to make a quick observation and say thank you very much, Janelle. That was an excellent question. I've only ever had 3 really good informants in my entire career, really good ones. I've had a number of people who saying, "Oh, I want to be your informant," and people ringing me up, but like, no disrespect to them, they were kind of not the most reliable informants in the world. I had 3 good ones, and one of those people solved more crimes for me, and well, not for me, for the people of Queensland. And I used their information, and I used their knowledge, and I used their insider stuff to solve more crimes than I think. And I mean, no disrespect to the scenes of crime guys, that a team of scenes of crime officers could have done. And that's not that they're not, because they're competent, they're capable, they're great at what they do. But this physical evidence will only take you so far. You need to know the context of what's happening. You need to know the internal dynamics of what's happening. You need to know motivations. You need to know all those other things. So you're spot on. You started talking a lot about honesty. Now, this is something I really want to talk about, and I think it links back to some of Janelle's and other questions as well. I'm going to choose my words here very carefully, but the service that I joined, and I'm still proud of serving, had a high degree of dishonesty in it. And what I mean by that is this: I don't mean corruption, although that probably still did exist even in '91. It was being rooted out. The bosses were serious about rooting out. The culture was against corruption. Like, things had, you know, I did not join a corrupt police service. I haven't seen any serious, what I would define as corruption in my 30-year career. I'd heard of it, but like, didn't kind of, and everyone else knew about it. Like, it was something that had gone way around before it got to me. But we had to do some dishonest things, especially before the PPRA, to be able to do our job. And I'd like to discuss the honesty issue and how lying for the right reasons, and how that affects, and also link that in with identity as well, because it's important. Like, people think they can compartmentalize their lying, especially when they're doing it for the right reasons, and you can't. You can't do that. Like, you know what I mean? You're going to end up a liar.
Yeah, see, that's the challenge. So I'll answer that question by referring back to undercover work. That's the challenge of undercover work, where you lie for a living, and you actually set out, you meet people with the intention of ultimately betraying them, which is not a normal thing for a human being to do, unless you're a psychopath or a sociopath. But that was our job. That's what we did, okay? Because, you know, at the end of the day, the people you were working on were crooks. Okay, that's all good. I think what you're talking more about is in the days before the power of arrest. So we had a power of arrest, it was a bit convoluted, and I'll keep it as simple as possible. But when you made a decision to arrest an offender, you were obliged to then caution them and then take them immediately to the watch house. Right, so you couldn't actually detain for the purpose of interview. And a good example, believe it or not, was if you drove past a bank and you saw someone race out of a bank with a shotgun and a balaclava in his hand, and you grabbed him, put him on the footpath, he was technically under arrest. You would not be able to interview him. You would need to take him directly to the watch house where he'd be charged.
Yep.
No interview. So what pretty much every cop was obliged to do was either trick someone into coming to the office for an interview, which often happened, or put them in a car, take them to the office, and then persuade them to sign a record of interview later on the old, in our case, Olivetti, with the six carbon papers, and persuade them to adopt the interview or sign a question in the interview, which was, do you agree you come here of your own free will? Now, let's say hypothetically that someone on the road, you'd say, I need you to come back to the office, we're going to interview you about 45 break-in enters. And they'd say, no, I'm not going anywhere. Hypothetically, if you grabbed them by the scruff of the neck, threw them in the back of the car in a headlock and dragged them back to the office, you would then be compelled to not be so truthful when you were asked about the circumstances of their detention. Because if you didn't do it, the jails would have been empty. That's the cold, hard reality of it. So when you have legislation that doesn't enable police to act appropriately and legally to fight crime, you will find that the rules will be bent. And the rules will be bent for the greater good. So I wouldn't call it dishonesty as much as, well, I guess it is the technical term, but bending the rules. Yeah.
I don't think it's corruption. Look, and you know, because I interviewed Terry O'Gorman a couple of weeks ago, and he probably disagree with me on this, and I respect his intellect. I seriously respect Terry O'Gorman. I'm not joking. I'm not being ironic or flippant. You know, he has a role to play in society, and and because his concern, being Blue, his brother, and he articulated this very well. He goes, look, my concern was corrupt police.
Yep.
And he goes, they were always in a minority. A concerning minority, a substantial minority.
Sure.
But, you know, a minority nevertheless. But I think I'm quite confident that he will define what we're talking about now as corruption. I don't see it as corruption because I see it as dishonesty, but I don't see it as corruption. And here's the distinction. It's because it doesn't benefit you. Corruption is when you gain something, kind of a la fraud, when you gain something for not doing your job.
Absolutely agree.
Or distorting it. Now, if you're doing it for the right reasons, and I put the inverted comma fingers up there for a reason, because it's totally debatable as to whether or not it's the right reason or anything. But like, let's just say that you're just thinking this person is a dirtbag, and they're actually right for what you're trying to kind of like do that for. And those things are big issues, because Terry O'Gorman will probably say, well, the whole issue is whether or not they're guilty, and you're just kind of railroading them. Again, totally reasonable. But we had no choice.
Well, in fact, mate, when Jim O'Sullivan was appointed Commissioner of Police after Newnham was ousted and returned to Melbourne, where he bloody should have been in the first place, I remember Commissioner O'Sullivan, I was in the BCI then, I think. Yeah, so back into the covert world of criminal intelligence. But he put a service-wide request out for all police to put a submission into him about where we felt that the powers under the criminal code needed to be amended, and one of those was a power of detention for arrest. And I can't remember exactly how he worded it. It was almost like an amnesty, and it was, you know, if you submit,
if you've done anything and you have any stories you need to
tell.
Well,
yeah, exactly right. And it was about, you know, and I think one of the questions, this is a dim distant past, but one of the questions was, you know, do you think that we need a power of detention, and please explain why? Because there was no power of detention. The only police force that had it, Victoria could hold you for 4 hours, then they had to let you go. Sorry, wrong, 6 hours, and they had to let you go. The feds had it. I think they had a power of detention for 4 hours. We didn't, neither did the West Australia Police, neither did New South Wales, and so on and so on. So that was two things. That was progressive, and it was brave of a police commissioner to actually put in writing, I need to understand examples so I can take this matter to the government. And I pulled the pin in 95, and even then we didn't have a power of arrest. Sorry, wrong. We didn't have a power of detention for questioning.
Yes.
We were relying on, if it was a federal offence, we were relying on the Federal Crimes Act from memory, which I think gave us a 2 or a 3 hour window. But we had nothing. So it was maybe 96, 97, I think, that maybe detention for interview came in. But all the way through the history of Queensland policing, it's just been, it was done in a particular way. Now, here's the challenge. Here's the challenge though, Matt. If we talk about the greater good, then you have individuals who could state planting evidence or putting a gun in someone's possession was for the greater good and not corrupt, because it actually achieved a means. Yeah,
that's right.
That,
you know, and Fitzgerald identified this, and like he was right. But the slippery slope argument is not Codswallop. But
well, yes, it's happened all over the world, mate. The New York Police Department under, you know, the Nat Commission inquiry with Frank Serpico was the whistleblower.
Oh yeah.
That was, Jesus, that was 1971 or something. And that all started with noble cause corruption, but it just went down a whole slippery slope. So my argument again is, you provide the right legislative power for a police service to investigate, charge, and ultimately, hopefully, convict, then you eliminate all of this need to bend the rules.
See, that's one of the things about Fitzgerald, and they kind of, and this is a big broad stroke, and I'm not justifying anything that happened, okay? Because I know Janelle is going to listen, and her dad went through this and it was a nightmare. Corruption is bad, okay? We can all agree on that. Even if we've got like a kind of like, well, is this corruption or is this or are you a heroic cop? Even putting that aside, like if you don't set up the right system for the police to act properly, really, who's kind of responsible for that?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Because you'll get police, Matt, who put their careers on the line by bending those rules to ensure that people are put behind bars to protect the rest of society. And that's a travesty. So the Fitzgerald inquiry itself, my commentary about the Fitzgerald inquiry has not been glowing, because I saw the personal impact on careers of police who were straight, honest people. And they were tarred because some of those investigators in Fitzgerald's inquiry went out and touted for business. And they literally went to the jails and said, anyone who's got a complaint about the police, take one step forward. They almost crushed in the rush. It was like standing outside the lift, the elevator at the bloody fraud squad at 4 p.m. You get rushed out, you know, stampeded in the rush to get out. But the problem was, and I've termed it papal infallibility, you know, and I've written about the fact that the papal infallibility, almost, you know, the Catholic Church reference, and I'm not one of them, all power to those of you who are, but meant that you could not question anything that came out of that inquiry. So a very good friend of mine, who was a very senior martial artist, great guy, he passed away 10 years ago now or something. Noel was working in the licensing branch, and he was accused by a couple of prostitutes of being pissed in a brothel, bouncing on the bed, demanding sexual favours. He didn't drink, for a start. He'd never drunk in his life, and that was not his style at all. Yet his career was under a cloud because of the uncorroborated statements by two hookers who just saw it as an opportunity to get paid back for any copper they could.
Yeah, that's right.
That's where the inquiry lost its way. Yeah.
And the other thing is, like, when you kind of look at them, you know, another comment I was going to make is, again, we agree that corruption is bad, but they kind of legalized everything the police was doing anyway. When it comes right down to it, really, and this is a bit of an exaggeration, but not that much that it can't be easily dismissed. What was happening was the police were dodgily locking people up because they didn't have powers of arrest. It's like the defendant came with me of his own free will. No, they didn't. They were kind of kidnapping people, or they were, you know, they were manipulating, and they were lying to the courts afterwards about it. But the courts then looked at that and went, and the people in power went, yeah, that's what's happened, but they need those powers. Let's legalize it. The other issue was, of course, prostitution, which, like, you know, I don't, even though I've interviewed a sex worker and she called herself the exuberant expert escort. You'd like that interview, mate. Actually, jump on. Seriously, have a look at that interview. It's a dead set ripper. The other great one was the former transsexual that I spoke to. That was
how your life's changed.
Yeah, well, you know, because I associate, and I articulated this to her, I associate prostitution with, you know, women who have been abused, who are on drugs, they're kind of unhappy, they live in crappy lifestyles, something they turn to because they've got nothing else. She goes, well, I'm not in that category. Fine, totally kind of respect that. But I would still submit that the vast majority of people fall into category A rather than category B. Even understanding that, I still don't think prostitution should be illegal, because there are, you know, there are the exuberant escorts, and there are people that go, well, I'm kind of low skilled, I can't really do anything else. They legalize prostitution. So they legalize, rather than the coppers having to kidnap people, they kind of go, oh, well, no, you can do that legally. They legalize prostitution. And again, the police taking cuts from turning a blind, and they legalize. So rather than SP booking, all of a sudden gambling became legal.
Yeah.
And rather than the police, and this is a direct line from a solicitor I know who was watching that. He goes, Matt, the whole Fitzgerald thing. And he was like he's a defense solicitor. He goes, you know what that was about? And I went, corruption and bad things happening in Queensland. He goes, the government wasn't getting their cut. It's about tax.
Yeah, it's about tax.
The cops were getting this money from SP booking. The cops were getting this money from gambling, and the government was dripping at the mouth, thinking of all those dollars that were going into the pockets of some cop who was like, and like you know, the service that that I joined, and because I've never really worked in Brisbane, so I understand it is different. But like, it was like I would say a good 40, somewhere between 40 and 60% of the service that I joined has surnames like mine. They were Irish Catholics. These guys had big families. There's a reason that they had to go to bush stations and live in a police house when you've got 5 or 6 kids. Yeah, and sure. It's the 80s and your wife's not working, and you get the winnings of the last horse race from the local SP bookie guy who works at the pub, and you just happen to be out doing RBT on that day, or you weren't on duty, or you know, whatever it is, instead of arresting those people. Or you know that the local madam who works out of the pubs, and again, she's sending you a kick. Not right, okay? Bad thing. Totally bad thing. Don't agree with that. That's for the viewers, not for you. But you can understand why it happened. And if it's that morally bad, why were all these things legalized?
Yeah,
why if it's just like, look at all these things and legalize them?
Mate, my experience though was, and I worked in some pretty interesting areas, as you know. The vast majority of men and women I worked with were like me. They were honest cops. The corruption that existed in the 70s and the 80s prior to the inquiry was controlled by a small cohort of pretty senior cops. Yeah. So that endemic corruption, that organised corruption, was the Rat Pack. We all know who the Rat Pack were. And people who were appointed into senior positions who could run it all. So, you know, the head of the licensing branch was the one that was kicking money upstairs to the commissioner. And that's all been led in court. Whether you agree with the verdict or not is immaterial. It's been led in court. Appeals have been quashed. The former commissioner went to jail. So that was organised, yeah. I do know, having grown up in North Queensland, that there were still, and you're right, some coppers who were benefiting from cattle duffing, that they were benefiting from letting an SP operation run, you know, in small country towns, all that stuff. But I think it's really important for all the people listening to this to remember that the vast majority of coppers were straight people, very honest people. You know, I've written about a drug raid that I was involved in book number 2. And when you read it, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Was when he went to a raid, back as a detective, back in the normal field squad, 140K, I think, was in a shoebox in the house. A particular senior policeman detective came downstairs and we said, we're going to rip this guy off. And I was underneath searching with another young detective. We looked at each other and went, Jesus, I'm not into this. And he said, what are we going to do? About 10 minutes later, he stormed downstairs and used some classic Anglo-Saxon language to say that one of the other detectives had stuffed it all up because he'd photographed the cash. Thank God. I told this bloke who's now retired at a wake for a mutual friend that I went to Brisbane for a few years ago. And he said, yeah. He said, I remember that job very well. He said, I've always wondered why they didn't talk to me much after that. Because there was an honest cop, thank God, who was on a job. The majority of us were, but just those who were going to rip this drug dealer off were senior. And that's a great example of the corruption that existed. And it existed, I reckon, well, no, don't reckon, across every police force in those days. If you look at Sydney and the Royal Commission, holy Jesus, they made Queensland look like kindergarten kids.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking murder and mayhem and extortion.
They were killing people.
They were, yeah. Letting crooks have a green light to do whatever they wanted. But so you go back to the, you know, and it's interesting because all the research and reading I've done around the area of corruption, not just when I was in the cops, when I was doing an undergrad degree, but later, just to try and get an understanding of what I saw, was that people can justify almost anything. So they can justify it with our salary's crap, right? I've got a big family. It's not going to hurt anybody. No one will find out about it. In my world, you carried a badge and you either had integrity or you didn't. There were no degrees of it. Yeah. And that sounds idealistic. And yeah, look, you know, I've bent the rules. I've certainly belted a few people. I've been, you know, in shootings, all that sort of stuff. That was all part and parcel of being a cop. But I've never, and no one that I knew personally has ever taken a quid or $1 for not doing their job. That to me is corruption, where you actually get the cash in an envelope for not doing your job. You know
Exactly.
what I mean? And I get very passionate about it, mate, because, you know, I think the police force was unfairly maligned after the inquiry. Certainly, my friends looked at me differently, you know, without doubt. And these are friends outside the cops, and you could feel a real shift in the environment after the inquiry report came out, where Fitzgerald was quite critical about a number of things, some rightly so, but he made some pretty sweeping statements as well, which was the average police officer in Queensland is lucky to graduate year 8. Yeah, well, which was incredibly insulting.
Well, see, that's it too. And there's a lot of snobbery that still is there with that. It's like, and you can see it in the backlash against against Brexit, Trump, any of those sorts of things. Oh, well, they're scammy, uneducated. They haven't had the benefits. It's like, well, haven't had the benefits of being fed codswallop. But I've got a direct question here, and it kind of leads on to what you were saying before. Mate, was there a point where you realised the QPS didn't have your back? Did you ever kind of hit that?
Oh, Jesus. Where do I start?
Yeah. Me too, Greg. Yeah, me too, Greg. So there's another guy here that kind of like talking about his academic achievements and yeah, me too.
Yeah. Well, to back one half a step, when Fitzgerald made that statement, he attacked the integrity is the wrong word, but he attacked the motivation for a lot of cops to join the job, which was to protect people from predators. You know, he intimated in that report that the majority of us were dumb bastards, so the only job we could get was being a copper, which really pissed us off.
Yeah.
Back to the QPS.
Snobs.
I think it started with undercover when I saw what happened to my colleague with the heroin habit. When I realised that management didn't really have our backs. After I was involved in Operation Flashdance and I had what I now know to be PTSD, I I took some sick leave, I don't know, 3 months after the gunfight, and we can talk about that without a problem, when my mate was killed, and I was burned out. I was stuffed. I went to a doctor. I had no idea what was wrong with me. Burst into tears when I spoke to the doctor, and he gave me, I think he gave me 3 weeks off. 2 or 3 days later, I got a phone call from my boss in the tactical world to say, oh, a particular superintendent, I won't name, even though he's dead, he's rung me to ask me what's wrong with you and why aren't you at work. Now, I'd been in a gun battle 3 weeks before that had never happened. One of my mates was shot to death. Another great friend of mine almost died, and I was fucked. And his arrogance and temerity to ask me that question still makes me angry now. And that's when I started realizing, Jesus, these guys don't really care. And it's not just about me, it's about most of us.
Yeah.
So that would have been, to answer that question, mate, I'd reckon September 1987.
I remember because and one of the reasons I got out is because I was turning into a bit of twisted old sergeant, and like those magnificent young people out there, and I know there's going to be quite a few listening, and there are actually looking at this. There's quite a few listening right now.
Yeah, good.
They don't need me to get bitter, twisted, and cynical.
Yeah.
You know, the job is going to do that. Like, let them stay young, keen, and idealistic, because God knows we need these magnificent.
Yeah.
And I don't mind saying this. I mean guys like Sam Scott. I mean guys like all these magnificent. And I'm sorry, there's so many names up there, but all these magnificent young people that I had the privilege and pleasure of working with, who for some reason actually looked up to me just because I had a couple of chevrons on my shoulder. It's like, you're smarter than me. Like, this power dynamic is all wrong. And I got to lead them, and I got to work with them, and they're gonna hit that wall sooner or later. They don't need me. They don't need a burnout old sergeant to be sitting there in the car going, that job's crap. And one of my old sergeants said to me, and this is really early in the job, we're driving around, and he goes, "What's your number, Maloney?" I said, 8753, Sarge. And he goes, "That's right." And I'm like, "What? That's all you are. You're a number." Blah, blah, 15-minute lecture. Yeah, I don't care. You're just a tool, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like cringing, and okay. I mean, he's right. Everything that guy said is right. But that's not the point. You're still going to get a good 15, 20 years of, somewhere between.
Look, I'll tell you what, Matt, if I hadn't been so emotionally broken as a result of Operation Flashdance, then I would have been a lifer. But because I was one of those sergeants that wanted to break that paradigm or that cycle of telling everyone how screwed the job was.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of the fact that, my team still say to me even now, "Jesus, Banksy, we loved working for you, mate, because you weren't like the rest of them." And I wanted to affect change from within. So I had all of that positivity. What broke me was undiagnosed PTSD, because we didn't know what PTSD was. And then to have, some dickhead demanding to know why I was on sick leave 3 weeks after a gunfight or whenever it was, and then a continual set of events, I think, that just made me angrier and angrier, and I suddenly developed this whole wall of cynicism and rebelliousness, rebelliousness.
I want to go into this, but the way I want to frame it, if it's okay with you, and if it's relevant to both what you've written in the past,
sure,
and the conversation, is identity. Because coppers have identity as we are the knights in shining armor. We are all those sorts of stuff. And I know from the chats that I used to have, because I was a peer support officer and all that kind of stuff. And even if you're not that, like if you're just a senior police officer who the guys kind of like feel that they can talk to, you get these guys sliding up to you and go,
"Yeah,
stuff this job right up, and this is happening, and I've been reported, and I kind of need to talk to someone." And because their identity, their self-image, their identity is like someone who's competent, capable, and it's good. And they all were, and then to have someone challenge that.
Yeah. Particularly someone who's incompetent.
Yeah. So, mate,
yeah.
So please talk us through your PTSD journey. Or talk us through Flashdance. Talk us through your PTSD journey. And if you can kind of link that back to this, this idea of identity.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I'll do the succinct version, I guess, of Operation Flashdance. I was mindful about the time, but in 1987, the Tactical Response Group was a forerunner of CERT, and we'd gone full time. There were a bunch of us, maybe 6 or 7 of us, who were full-time operators, which was the first time that it happened. We were tasked with executing a high-risk search warrant on a house looking for a fugitive armed robber who'd escaped from Longbow Jail, I think 7 years before. Paul James Mullen, who had shot and killed, I think, one security guard, badly wounded another, totally without provocation, just because he was an asshole. And he'd been doing a number of violent armed robberies around Brisbane. So we were tasked with executing a high-risk raid, and this is where it first started, when I realised that we didn't have the support of everybody. 2 of us put together a deliberate option plan to raid the house, which involved the use of distraction grenades, so stun grenades, and tear gas. There were 2 children in the house with Mullen's de facto, who, by the way, was his accomplice and his driver on all of his armed robberies, so no angel. It was the first week of the Fitzgerald inquiry. The plan went to a particular assistant commissioner, and it was sent back to say that we weren't permitted to use stun grenades and tear gas because there was no reason articulated, but it wouldn't have been a good look because of the week of the Fitzgerald inquiry, and the department or the service or the force then was getting bad publicity. That was the first thing. So they put us in a position where I knew I had to effect a raid, and all of my guys did as well, without the tools that we needed. So we're also instructed when to do the job. And the day that we did the raid was the day a particular senior police officer was to jump in the witness box at the inquiry. And it wouldn't have been, and it turned out not to be a very good day for him. So I'm still convinced that that was no coincidence. So anyway, so we raided the house in the early hours of the morning, 5:30 actually. Had to force our way in. The offender had switched the door hinges around to make the door open outwards, which slowed our advance into the place. My team, I had a distraction team beside his bedroom, and they were instructed if they heard, because we're trying to get entry covertly, if they heard us smashing the door, they were to throw a ladder through the window to distract him. They did exactly that, and within less than 2 seconds, he was out of bed and firing 2 high-powered shots through the skirting board at where a team would have been climbing the ladder. So he was ready to go. He was using a 223 semi-automatic rifle, a Mini 14.
Yeah.
It
Good
took
guns.
us, yeah, well, you could buy them anywhere in those days. You didn't need a driver's license, you just could go and buy them from Kmart.
Yeah.
And we effected entry. We probably slowed down by maybe 5 seconds, if that, but that's a long time in the tactical world. Peter Kidd was first in the assault team. Went to the bedroom where this guy was, and he opened fire through the door. He shot Peter 5 times. My mate Steve was number 3 in the team. As he approached the doorway, he was shot in the stomach. The assault team leader of the second assault team started firing at the offender because he leapt across the hallway when all his rounds were coming at him. And then 2 of us engaged the offender, and the offender died at the scene. So basically, he was shot and killed. Peter died that morning in hospital. So what happened then was that we were, so Peter died. Steve, my mate, was in hospital. We didn't expect him to recover. That was frightening. We actually had to convince the acting police commissioner, the deputy commissioner, that we needed to be interviewed by the homicide squad, because he said, oh, well, it's all fine, an offender's been killed, policeman's died, go home. No. So, and thankfully we pushed it. And so we were interviewed by the homicide squad, and there was a coronial inquest, I think 9 months later. So that was one. I don't know whether that wasn't that he was backing us up. I think that was complete naivety. But the lack of backup came when The bullet-resistant vests we were using were level 2 vests, and Peter Kidd, the officer who was killed that morning, had put a request in to have these ballistic vests upgraded, and was knocked back because of budget. When the shit hit the fan, and the media found out about this, suddenly the budget was found, and they sent me along with someone else to go to Sydney to test vests. So that's when I started to think, holy Jesus, Banksy, not everyone's as fair income as you'd like them to be. So when it came down to budget, then there was a move to lose the report that Peter had put in that was officially knocked back. And thankfully, that wasn't lost. And then all of those sorts of things started to compound, yeah? We were criticised quite roundly in the media. We weren't permitted to respond before the coronial inquest. We were, I wouldn't say that we got all the support that we should have from police command. I think there was a fair bit of arse covering because they were worried about being sued by Peter's family. And that was really the first part of my extreme disappointment, I think, in the faith that I'd had in those in charge of the police force to look after us. So I started spiraling downhill. I couldn't sleep. I had flashbacks. I started drinking way, way too much. I think about 2 months after that happened, I was sitting at home pissed, and my girlfriend, my fiance, was out at a function. She wasn't a cop. She worked in private enterprise. I put a 9mm in my mouth, cocked it back, took the safety off, and thought about just squeezing the trigger and taking myself out.
Wow.
I didn't do it because I remembered a suicide that I'd been to, and I remember the blood spatter and the mess.
Yeah.
And I thought, if I do this, she'll come home and she'll never be the same again. That's when I realised I had some problems. And I woke up the next morning and thought, shit. But I didn't have anyone to talk to. And in those days, the culture of policing was alpha male. If you were female, you were an alpha male. Yeah, that's how you survived. We didn't admit that we had problems. We didn't show any weakness. And then the next stage of my darkness was that I developed a homicidal urge. I wanted to kill everybody I could who was a crook. And I wanted to go on every job I could and have any opportunity to drill someone as pure revenge for what had happened to Peter. I stayed in the team for another 2 years, I think, carrying all of this darkness and this, and I volunteered for every risky job I could. Thank God I didn't get the opportunity to drop the hammer on anybody else. But I knew that I was turning into something that I wasn't, because I'm actually a nice guy. So I remember I went to, and I will shamelessly talk about the book in this, mate, because the second book I've written very openly about this journey. And I've done that for 2 reasons. It's catharsis for me, but I really want people who are out there struggling to read this and get the very clear understanding they're not by themselves, because I thought I was. I thought I was the only one it was happening to. I went to the doctor, as I said, burst into tears. He gave me some time off, and then I was, asked to explain why I was on sick leave. And I said to my senior sergeant, "Well, tell him I've got a sexually transmitted disease, and I'll probably infect the whole fucking office if I go back." Because I had just, I just had enough. And I remember he laughed. He said, "How about we just tell him you got the flu?" Okay, whatever.
Oh, yeah. Frapism.
That's right. But I knew I had to get out. So I went to him and said, "Look, I've got to go, man. I've got to get out of tactical because I've got some problems." Moved to covert criminal intelligence. So I ran the wing clipping desk, outlaw motorcycle gang investigation. And here's where it compounds. So I was part of a national task force to disrupt the Hells Angels world run in Adelaide in 1993 from memory, and travelled around, did that. We did a tremendous job and it all worked well. I came back to Brisbane and wrote a paper and produced it to a particular person who will become obvious in a few minutes. Wrong. Who will, his role in my departure from the job will become obvious in a few minutes. So presented this paper, the threat of outlaw motorcycle gangs, organised crime, blah-de-blah. I was sitting beside a detective senior sergeant. This bloke had been recently promoted to superintendent. And he tossed the report literally on the table and said, your problem is you've romanticised the bikies. There's more things to worry about than that. Here we are 30 some years later, and they are an incredible criminal organisation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So applied for, so I went back to the CIB and the task force, crime operations, major crime. I responded to a shots fired call in the centre of the city in 1993, the MLC building, siege, guy with a box full of gelignite, hand grenade, a rifle. For whatever reason, I went in there when I shouldn't have, and I spent an hour and a half with him negotiating, and I'm not a negotiator, and talked him out of killing himself and me. All good. So I got publicity for that. I got a Valor Award for that. When that Valor Award was announced, they being the department, somehow resurrected the original Flashdance reports. So I had a Valor Award for that as well, as did my mates, so on. And a couple of them were overlooked. It's just all this political bullshit that happens with medals. But anyway, so had that, applied for a promotion back in criminal intelligence where this particular person was very senior and didn't get it. So I went, okay, no problem. I went to have a feedback session. To cut a long story short again, after 40 minutes of giving me the party line about, your management experience isn't good enough, your knowledge needs work. And he actually said you can't make decisions in emergency situations, which I found quite interesting. And I sat there and said,
no, sorry. Could you say that again?
Yeah, he told me that I couldn't make decisions in emergency situations. And I said, are you serious? And
how many people you shot? Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I said, look, I want to know the truth. And again, I've put this in the book. I can't identify him, but I'm sure people who were around in those days didn't know who he was, and I'm happy to tell them in person. As long as they buy me 150 lashes. Print that out, Matt. Send it to James Squire, and we'll split the process.
Yeah, product placement. Come on.
But and I sat there and said, oh yeah, I'd like the truth. And he said, right, this is almost word for word. He said, your problem is you're too outspoken. You're too loyal. No, you're too outspoken. You're too friendly with the people that are in your teams. You challenge authority. And one other. Too outspoken, too friendly, challenge authority. Oh, and you argue with decisions. I went, right. I said, so as far as being outspoken is concerned, yeah, I am, because I will always say what needs to be said. Being friendly with the people that are in my team, absolutely. I go through a hot door with someone and they're looking after my back or vice versa. I'm their mate. I will be a manager and drop an anvil if I have to, but I much prefer to lead by example and manage people in an appropriate fashion. Challenging authority, I'll challenge a stupid decision by people of your rank and others every day of the week when I think it's wrong and operationally wrong. And so I went down this part, and he said, yep. He said, there's your problem and your publicity. I said, my publicity? He said, yeah, all the media you've got with your bloody medals and stuff. Wow, and that said it all. So, and I did say to him in some very frank terms that I didn't get out of bed and look for a siege or a shootout. I actually was a cop and did my job. So what that taught me and told me was that, yeah, they didn't have it back, to answer your question from about a half an hour ago, which disappointed me incredibly, because it wasn't about Banksy. It was about everybody who went to work doing police work and trying to do the best they could. Those who got to the top of the slippery promotional pole either had never seen an angry man, because he certainly saw one that day in that office, believe me. They'd never seen an angry man, or they'd completely forgotten what it was like to be an operational copper protecting people from predators. At the same time that he was telling me that, I was being headhunted by a veteran, medically retired Victoria guy who'd been shot in a gunfight in Melbourne and was very senior in Coles Myer retail organisation. Mark would take me to dinner every time he came to Melbourne. He took me to dinner maybe 2 weeks after this conversation and said, I want you to work for me. I said, why is that? I'm just a copper. You know what he said? And you can't make this up. He said, I love the way that you're loyal to people you work with, you challenge stupid decisions, you're outspoken, and you're I kid you not. I kid you not. So that's the story, my friend, and I pulled the pin. PTSD recovery. Yeah, I know. This is why everybody out there should buy this goddamn book and read it, because it's all there.
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah.
Or borrow it
I
from your
wanted my
mates.
copy.
Borrow it from your mates. I don't care. Because the last part of it is recovering from PTSD, and I struggled. I just thought I had an anger problem. Yeah, I had all of what I now know as the classic symptoms. I used to sit in meetings in the private world, the corporate world, and someone would say something, and I'd look at him and just think, I would love to reach across and smash your head into the coffee table. Yeah. All of that. I used to call it the red mist. And just go, ooh. But 11 years after I resigned, I had a massive crushing anxiety attack. I was literally walking to get a cup of coffee and just couldn't move. The whole world just fell on my shoulders. No catalyst, no trigger. It just all went boom. And that's when I started talking to counsellors and couldn't find the right one for years. And finally found the right one a couple of years ago. And she formally diagnosed me with PTSD. The others hadn't, which is interesting. But the diagnosis was actually incredibly empowering, because I realized that I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't making it up. Some years before that, when I'd read about PTSD, it still makes me chuckle. I thought to myself, well, that can't be me. That's for people who've been through some really serious shit. So the path to recovery is a difficult one. The first step is absolute self-assessment and acceptance of the fact that you have an injury. Yeah. My pride wouldn't let me do it in hindsight. Tough guy, alpha male, I don't have a problem. I'm just angry. I just hate the world. I just want to murder people. I just want to punch the fuck. Oh, hang on. Maybe I do have an anger problem. But then working through that it's a lot of mindfulness. It's a lot of understanding lived experience. The key is communication, which is why I love doing this. The books have given me an opportunity to do a lot of media, podcasting, and great conversations like this with you, Matt, where I am able to talk about the most important thing in recovery is talking, is absolutely talking, and removing the stigma around it. Back in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, you'd only honestly talk to your mate if you were, 3/4 pissed. And then you'd talk very quietly about things in case someone overheard. So now that the difference is we are able to speak from the rooftops about the fact that post-traumatic stress is an injury, not a disorder. I think that the verbiage is wrong. I think it's certainly post-traumatic stress injury. I think it needs to be treated and discussed in the same way. If you broke your leg, you get medical treatment for a broken leg, you get looked after. You have a mental injury or a stress injury through what you see and what you experience, it should be treated in the same way. So I could talk about that for another 2 hours, because it's an incredible passion of mine. And I think peer support is formally a great thing within the service, but I think just as powerfully informally. If people can talk to someone who's been through a similar situation, that's incredibly powerful. I do it now as a volunteer peer support officer for Police Veterans Victoria. I'm the only non-VicPol person who's in there. And that's exactly what I do. I have a cup of coffee with people who are struggling, have a listen to them. I'm able to say, hey, I get it, mate, because, this has been my journey. I think the problem that we have in every police service in the country is that even though there's a counselling process in place for critical incidents, if you put your hand up voluntarily, you're still in the back of your mind that your career is going to be tainted because people think you're in that case.
Yeah.
That's the problem. We've got to change that, and it'll only change generationally. It won't change anytime quickly.
And it's true, and half the time you're doing peer support and you don't even know you're doing it. Like,
yeah,
I kind of alluded to that before. So, someone will just slidle up to you when you're shoving whatever it is, particular fast food you purchased that day in your head. and they'll want to talk about something, and all people really need, I think, and I hope that I'm kind of correct about this, is validation. And by validation, I don't mean saying.
Yeah.
I don't mean saying, because like sometimes people will be telling you stuff, and you think, oh, you kind of, not you did something wrong, but you have breached a procedure, or you have breached a policy, or maybe you were a little bit scared at that moment and you didn't make an optimal decision. Maybe all of these kind of things.
Because you're human.
And yeah, that's right.
Mm.
And you kind of say at the end, and like, because I didn't like lying to people, and I would never kind of say it. And I said, oh, well, maybe this is, but I can see why you did that. And all of those things considered, I probably would have done the same thing.
Mm.
And you just watch people go, yes. Because it's like they need someone else to kind of say, yeah, to validate their humanity, to validate the fact that and that comes back to the identity thing that we were talking about before, because everyone's got an identity of who they are and what they're going to do in any particular given circumstance, and you don't know really unless you're tested. And really, I keep on harking back to movies. Anytime people watch, because that's really how most people form.
Sure.
They play the character of who they think they are out in their head. They're thinking, well, if I was facing Darth Vader, I'd be drawing my lightsaber, and I'd be. There's no way I would run away from a 7 foot tall Sith warrior. No way, man. I'd valiantly face him. It's like,
yeah.
You wouldn't, man.
You wouldn't.
You totally would not do that.
Have another donut.
You would run your ass away. You know what I mean? Or
right.
You know what I mean? Or maybe you'd face him in panic, or or maybe you'd end up, if you subdued him, you'd end up needling on his head for too long.
The classic, Matt. Why didn't the police shoot the gun out of his hand or shoot him in the arm?
God, it's true. I don't know how many times I've heard that.
Yeah, and it's a diet of TV and movies, and dare I say it, stupidity.
Again, they're protected. I don't think it's as stupidity, because there's some really intelligent people saying it. I think it's the sheltered thing.
It depends on definition of stupidity.
Well, it's like you're so sheltered. It's like you don't understand that the reason you can think that is because, to kind of paraphrase Kipling, who he uses one of my favorite poems, Tommy. Tommy this and Tommy that.
Yep.
Because there are people out there doing violence on your behalf. Making mocky uniforms that guard you while you sleep is cheaper than those uniforms, and they're starvation cheap.
Nice.
Laugh it up, buddy. The reason you can live in a delusional world is because people like me have gone out and faced that.
That's right.
And I've failed too. Like, I don't mind admitting this. Like, I've failed, I've faltered, I've weakened, I've tired. I look back on my 30-year career and I kind of think, generally speaking, I think I did okay. But there are a couple of times where I just look at these jobs and go, was that you? Like, was that you? This guy who's got this idea of this competent, capable, intelligent person. Did you really say that?
Yeah.
Did you really do that? Is it what were you thinking? What?
Yeah, I know, and that just, and I'm the same. And I think anybody who's ever worn the uniform or carried the badge was honest with themselves to say the same thing. Because it's a bloody hard job, and I absolutely take my hat off to the men and women who are doing it now, with all the scrutiny and the accountability and the second guessing and all of that stuff. Holy Jesus,
and they're magnificent. Wow. And it's kind of like I get angry with crusty old sergeants sit there and go, the young people today are so different, blah blah blah. So yeah, your crusty old sergeants were saying the same thing about you. Okay, like. And secondly, you look at these magnificent young people that are out there now, and they are magnificent. But by and large, they're they're in their mid-20s.
Yep.
And your average cop on the street now, and the stats that I'm quoting you are pretty old. Like, I read an article a while ago. They've got like 5 to 7 years service, which really isn't all that much. Like 5 years, you're kind of breaking even at that stage. But they're probably looking after someone who's got like 1, 2, maybe 3 years service. Your average cop on the street's probably only got 5 years. You know what I mean? You got supervisors driving around.
It's worse in Victoria, Matt. It's worse in Victoria. There was an incident in Burke Street Mall 2 years ago where a guy drove in there, stabbed to death the proprietor of a famous restaurant in Burke Street, stabbed a security guard. The two GD cops who turned up, one was literally 2 weeks out of the academy. The other guy with him had 2 years. And they dealt with this character.
And they do a pretty good job. So when I'm talking to solicitors and when I'm talking to media people and everything else, and I don't mean, because surprisingly high amounts of the media, I've got to say this, are on side of the police. We only focus on the idiot lefties, the Guardian and NITV and all those other idiots, and they're just ideological. They're possessed by ideology. You can't reason with those people. Yeah. But I kind of say to them, look, why are you surprised that there's mistakes and shortcomings? When I look at the training they have and how junior they are, and that you just can't predict policing, I'm not surprised there's mistakes. I'm surprised there's so few. I'm surprised there's so few dead people. I'm surprised there's so few unlawful arrests. I'm surprised there's so few lives. It amazes me. And it's those young people out there. And like at my kind of like, I used to tell them all the time, so, briefings and go, just so you know, guys, I'm proud to work with you.
Excellent.
I used to say that to them because I was, and I've just got a comment here from Mr. Eels. Thank you very much, Mr. Eels. And he's a civilian chap watching it. And my gosh, he's, sir, the story that you just told on there, he had a death message of his son delivered to him. Sir, thank you. That's a comment that you have made from something saying that. Seriously, sir, those things do not go unnoticed and unappreciated. And I hope the burden of your grief and loss is being lifted. No, seriously, sir, that's very brave of you to say that, and we really appreciate it. You've discussed talking, so it was basically support and reaching out and everything that brought you back. Did writing have any part?
Yeah, good, mate. Yeah, good call. It did. It was, I started writing the first book, 4 years before I even thought about trying to have it published. And I started writing simply to try and give my two daughters something to read to help them understand why their father was so emotionally distant for much of their childhood. And I was never physically violent. I could never do that. But I certainly had short-term anger, impatience, emotional distance. I had a need to be by myself a lot. I drank way too goddamn much. And so the writing actually helped me start to frame it a little, And as I started writing stuff, and I shared it with a couple of friends, I shared it with a couple of guys I train in my karate dojo with, and the immediate response was, "Man, this is great. You need to write more." So I had that affirmation, I had that validation, and I had a sense now of purpose and identity as, okay, Banksy is going to write his stuff, as simple as that sounds. And I wrote, the more I wrote, the more at ease I was with it. And the first book was about undercover. It was about the impact of that. And my my naive first time as a writer, I actually didn't put in the acknowledgements or whatever, the author's note, that the conversation was accurate, because I'd actually had, thanks, mate, I'd had access to all my undercover notebooks. So I didn't make the conversation up. I didn't have to. But I wrote very strongly about the impact and the challenges and the consequences of that life. So then the second one was, and I love that quote, that was Nietzsche. We actually used to talk about the abyss and standing on the abyss after we had enough beers, where we could start to be honest with each other. That's when, you realize that if you gaze too long into it, it stares back at you. And that's where I was turning to. So the second one was more personal. And the second one was about, I wanted to really write about that journey through PTSD. My youngest daughter, who's 23, sent me a text so the book was released 20th of July, and she had an advance copy. And she was in Cairns up there with a friend, and she sent me a text which showed me that I'd achieved it, because she sent me this beautiful text which was, "Dad, I never understood before. If I'd gone through the loss that you had, particularly at a young age, I'm so proud of the fact that you've come through it." It was just a beautiful text to get. Wow. So the writing was for me, that's the power of writing, and sharing that with people. The scary thing is, you know, the first book sold really well, so there's all these thousands of people out there who know a lot about me, and I'll never meet them. And similarly, Jesus, look how young I was. Similarly,
and for the listeners, there's a website, so it's obviously up here, keithbanks.com.au.
Yeah.
So the books, the journey, about, and media contacts, and all that. It's actually a really good. It's actually a really good website.
Oh, thanks, mate.
I really enjoyed it, and obviously Northern Vibe will end up on this on the Wall of Fame up here.
Yeah, well, yeah, you bet. So that's what it was, mate. To answer that, it's an incredibly cathartic experience, and shrinks will say that to people. They'll say, journal, you know, write your story down. Don't underestimate how powerful that is. And I was published simply because I never thought I would be, and I just had a friend who had been published. She got a couple of chapters, sent them to the doyen of Australian publishing, who consults to Allen and Unwin, and boom, there it was. So again, that's affirmation as well. And I think one of the symptoms of PTSD is that constant need, as you say, for validation, affirmation.
Yep.
Yeah, I understand it now. I know why I'm so bloody needy.
And people need it, like, you know, and again, this.
Yeah.
And look, it's to my discredit. It actually took me a number of years to understand what was happening when someone comes sliding up, because, you know, even after 15 years in the job, I saw myself as a kind of like, the Facebook comments are going to hammer me for this. I know, Gregory Arthur, what you're going to say about this and some of the other guys, but like, you kind of see yourself as like still a novice. You're still learning, and why would anyone look at me? What have I got to offer?
Yeah, sure.
But you'd have to see yourself from the other person's shoes. It's like, no, they see you as an experienced officer. They see you as like, and even it took me a while to understand that going to jobs, because, you know, as a 19-year-old when I joined, I'd be sitting there wide-eyed listening to these people telling me their deepest, darkest sexual secrets and stuff like that when I was 19. Dude, I'd lost my virginity, like, you know, not even 2 years before. And here's this lady, like, I remember my first TV, she's like, and yeah, and all the sex, and, you know, he doesn't shag me enough. And I'm like, this lady's old enough to be my mother. Like, you know, I'm still talking about it 30 years later, you know.
Oh, I get it.
So, you know, and then all these other things. And then it genuinely took me years to realize that people were, what do you think, Constable? I'm like, who died made me? Like, looking over my shoulder here, like, you've spoken to me for more than 10 seconds. Surely you've realized I'm a buffoon. Like, I'm just here to, like, enforce the law. Why are you asking me these? And you start to realize that people see you as competent, capable, in control, you know.
But also, mate, you've got life experience beyond your years, and I've been interviewed by a couple of special forces guys who've done numerous tours of Afghanistan, and we talk about this, and they talked about lived experience, and that's what it's all about. You know, lived experience in first responders will give you countless of years of maturity above people your own age who are, with all due respect to accountants, sitting in an accounting office.
Yeah.
You know?
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's an important job.
No
disrespect.
Not for me.
It's just different. Like, and that's it too. And again, but it's finding out who you are. Again, it comes back to this thing with identity that we discussed really earlier.
Yeah.
And like, you know, you kind of hint at it in the books, because I kind of, you know, I've ordered one, and I'm reading all the stuff on the others. And I've got to say, it's the covert one that particularly appeals to me. It's like, okay, so with identity, you'd have to start asking yourself, so when am I lying?
Yeah.
Who's the real me?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Am I lying when I pull on a blue shirt?
Yeah.
Am I lying when I go, who's? Yeah. And you think about the implications. You think about the implications for, like, you know, and because one of the things about the police that's both good and bad is, like, for me, I found out things about myself that just, because I had this self-image, and it's like, oh man, I've articulated on other kind of stuff. I like violence. It turns out that I like violence. Like, I like it. I'm not particularly good at it. Like, I can look after myself. But yeah. I like it. Like I have this real desire for mayhem.
Yeah.
And, you know, I always saw myself as pretty easygoing. And I think relative for cop standards, I am. But like finding out at some outside of the police that people are going, you're really disagreeable. And I'm like, what?
That's right. No, I'm not.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm kind of like, but I was sitting there going, but I would seriously be sitting there going, how did you come to that conclusion? Like that is nowhere near my self-image. Like I see myself as like people going, well, as your job interview, it's like the things that the greatest strengths were the greatest weaknesses.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, because you know, you told me and there are a couple of subjects that I'm particularly passionate about and I get informed about. So if I'm talking to people about making policy or having discussions about kind of anything, I say no. That well, the facts say this, the facts say that, and sorry, the conclusion you've come to, and I say things like you're wrong. And no, like I don't think there's anything wrong with being blunt because look, when you praise people afterwards, and I find this too, when I praise people, I go, no, that's really good. They don't. Well, I know you're not bullshitting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you told me I was wrong and I stuffed that up. It's like,
but
well,
people find assertive conversation confrontational. They find it, and they just don't like it because you know you might be not even raising your voice or whatever, but just assertive about what you're saying. No, I'm sorry, that's wrong. They'll be horrified because oh my god, you know you're
how
saying
dare you? How dare you? You're being disrespectful. It's like, no. I'm not making any value judgments on you as a human being. But the observation you made about objective reality it doesn't line up. Okay, here's what you said. Here's objective reality. Oh, look, they're not the same. I'm sorry, that's not my fault. Like,
and don't annoy me, or I'll put you in a chokehold and take you out.
Yeah, well, no, I don't. I've had those thoughts at some of the meetings. Especially the ones that I love the most when I'm told that I'm privileged. Oh, I just love it.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, I love that so much.
I grew up in caravan parks, mate. I've been told I was privileged as well.
Oh, I find myself reaching for a Glock that thankfully is no longer there. But look, a couple of shout outs actually. There's one of our listeners is Mr. Eels, runs a suicide support group after suicide in Mackay, Queensland.
Good.
Big shout out to them. Love your work, Mr. Eels. Thank you very much for that. I will put a link to your support group in here. I love to see stuff doing like that. Suicide is a kind of big thing with me. That was the we're talking about shameless book plugging. It's one of the things that I was published in. I'm a co-author of that book with a chap in New York. Actually, that was kind of cool. So we ended up and people were surprised when they heard I was like co-authoring a book. It was like, you're literate? When did you learn to read? Like, yeah. Go figure, as they say in the Big Apple. I had a great chat with Bluey O'Gorman.
Yeah.
And then following up with Terry, I just
perfect. Yeah.
Well, see, the thing is, like again, with the organisation I joined it had a real Irish Catholic feel to it. Like it wasn't just I get that.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of guys with my surnames, and I'd see at mass. When I went to sneak, on the odd occasion when I'd sneak in there on the weekend.
Yeah.
And they kind of think the Irish Catholics do think like there's this mentality. You know what I mean? They kind of they are argumentative and disagreeable. And as I said to both Bluey and Terry, I said, man, I'd pay a lot of money to be sitting around at your Christmas dinner table.
Well, Bluey used to, and I know Bluey very well, and he used to say exactly that. Christmas dinners at our house, Banksy, are an interesting day.
Jesus, Mary and St. Joseph, I bet they are. And they're all smart. Like they're all smart, driven people. Like, Terry's stupid razor smart. Like, oh my God, don't, Bluey's switched on, and then, you got Frank and you got, nuns and priests.
Yeah.
All these people are phenomenally well read, really, really kind of interesting people. All right. And we've just had one last, we've had a question from the crowd that's come up. Thank you, Mr. Great question. Have any of the bad guys or their associates still out there to affect some payback? Like, have you ever had any?
A lot of people have asked me that, and it's possible. but it was a long time ago. And I just think that the minor risk of that is far outweighed by the benefit of getting that message out there. That's, yeah. Besides,
yeah, it's worth it.
yeah, it is worth it.
Well, mate, look, on that, I'll get you to stay on for a second, but we're going to wrap it up. Look, to all the listeners out there, Northern Vibe just relies on people liking and sharing. So please like and share this interview if you've enjoyed it. And if you get really, really keen, grab the hyperlink and stick it in other websites that you're part of. I'm not on other social media other than kind of Facebook. So if you've got, Instagram or all these other new social medias that I kind of don't know anything about, distribute it through that. We'd certainly really, really appreciate it. Buy Banksy's books. They are great. You've seen the website on there. So if you just get on Google and you Google Keith Banks, it'll kind of, it'll come up. His website is great and I don't mind. He's given me nothing for plugging it. The reason I'm plugging it is because it's great. I've ordered the books and the reviews he's getting are outstanding. And I'm thinking that there's a reason why. So thank you very much. Really appreciate your support. It's fantastic to see all the people on there. Oh yes, and Mr. Grant's on there as well. I remember you from the aviation police, sir. So good to see you on there. You probably don't remember me, but I remember you.